Everyone, this is the February 2nd Jupyter IPython dev meeting, and as usual, we'll just get going right ahead. Min, I think you're up first, looking at the hackpad.
Yep. So it's a time for releases. Yesterday released Jupyter Hub, and with the user control user input form, probably ready to release IPython Parallel today or tomorrow. That's all set. I'm just touching up some docs there. Today there've been a few MathJax related issues that come up when people try to switch MathJax to MathML, mainly because we don't allow that, but there's UI still exposed that does allow people to try, and MathJax doesn't handle it very well when they try and fail. So there's a few little bug things to work on there. But otherwise, it's releasing those things, helping get IPython 4.1 ready to go. And yeah, that's about it. Chris? I think Matthias isn't here.
Oh, Matthias is not here?
Matthias is actually helping us interview a bunch of undergrads. We're going to be hiring some undergrads for the project from the Berkeley undergraduate research program, and Matthias is helping me with the interviews. So,
how many people are you guys hiring up there, undergrads?
We're not exactly sure. We'll see because we put out a call for undergraduates that was a combined call for a set of projects had bids that Stefan is running called the Machine Shop, which is basically to bring research problems from campus research projects and to collaborate with them. Stefan also has a call out for Scikit-Image, and we put out a call for Jupyter, and the combined pool was over 80 applicants, and they look really, really, really good. So we're actually pretty excited about that, and Stefan and Matthias have been helping with the interviews. I'm hoping we might get around 4 that we hire, perhaps to pair them in teams of 2 so that they can do a little bit of pair programming and end up working on maybe, at least initially, on 2 projects with some pair programming, and then we'll see how it goes from there. But the candidate pool of these students looked fantastic. There's a combination of reasons. Berkeley switched the computer science basic, the hard CS61 main computer science course to Python a few years ago, and they've been using, so these students actually have a pretty solid grounding in Python, and there's actually a bunch of courses at Berkeley now that are being taught using Jupyter Hub, and most of these students, at least the ones who applied and said they were interested in Jupyter, have taken 1 or more course with Jupyter Hub or Jupyter Notebooks manually deployed. And so we had an applicant pool that had both good Python expertise and actual knowledge of Jupyter and NumPy and SciPy, et cetera. So we're very impressed with the applicants, and we'll see how it turns out. But I'm hoping to report on probably 3 to 4 students later on, and obviously we'll introduce them to the team and whatnot. It's actually looking really good.
Cool.
Cool. Okay, so I've still been working on the problem of basically menus and dealing with that. So lots more conversations happened over the week through between me and my team, some guys at Bloomberg guys, as well as Brian and Cameron. So we're still iterating there, converging on what should be a nice flexible solution. Won't go into too much detail, but we should have a little demo of what that is soon. If anybody really cares about the details of that, I guess we can go over it at the end of the meeting or offsite, but I won't clutter up the meeting with that. So that's it for me.
So yeah, I've been working on things that overlap a lot with what Chris was talking about. We are changing direction with what the command palette does now as opposed to how it worked last week. But a big chunk of last week was actually iterating on the model that we're sort of moving away from. The command palette was really self-contained and was doing a lot of its own work. It was doing its own searching, and it was more standalone than it's now going to be. Now it's sort of going to be integrated as a menu thing all over the place. And so I'm working on that stuff now. There are a few sort of logical dead ends that might be interesting if somebody wants to check out the repo history, but I think we needed to see that to get here. And additionally, I did a little bit last week of adding some styles to the Jupyter.js plugins repo, just to make it closer to the designs we have. That's it for me. And I think Steve is next.
Yep. Still working on Jupyter Lab and specifically the file browser more last week on bug fixes, styling, refactoring. Hopefully that's pretty much ready to go. Then working now with Jason on refactoring some parts of the notebook this week and adding keyboard interactions, and hopefully get he'll talk more about that. And that's it for me.
Cool. So yeah, last week I mentioned that I would be working on the small splitting the IPyWidgets repo into JavaScript and Python components. And I had mentioned that we weren't quite sure what to do with the notebook JavaScript. And we talked it over, and it seemed to make sense to actually put the notebook JavaScript in its own repo. So the small split is now going to split into 3 repos. There'll be the JavaScript repo with just widget JavaScript, the Python repo, which will be a normal, simple Python package that depends on traitlets, and it will just have the widget definitions and interact. And then there'll be a repo for the NB extension, which will contain the logic that right now is kind of kludgy, that gets the widgets to work inside our current notebook. The benefit to this is that when Brian's stuff gets merged, a lot of the stuff in that NB extension repo will just kind of go away. And I think actually we won't even have to have any Python in there. So it will be a pure JavaScript library, which will be nice. I also added screenshots for every widget in all of the widget example notebooks, which I mentioned I was going to do last week. And I did that using that PR I did a few weeks ago that automated that. I made a couple bug fixes in Jupyter Dev Install. I added SSL and the ability to change the Python installation that it uses. So for any of you that have been holding off on using it because you couldn't do SSL remotes, now that's possible. I completed a React Redux Immutable JS full stack tutorial that Kyle recommended to me. I think it was very interesting. It's a different workflow. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach for sure. But if any of you guys are interested in doing that, it does take about 5 hours to complete. I added the link there in the hackpad. I've also been exploring some things that Kyle has been working on in his spare time. He has a project in specific that I've been exploring called IC, which is a JavaScript terminal based. It's like an alternative to the Jupyter console, but all written in Node.js. And the benefit to that is you can take advantage of the Node.js packages. The project itself isn't a replacement for the Jupyter console. It's far from as feature complete as the Jupyter console is. But I'm intrigued by the possibility of integrating the widgets into that application because there's some really cool NPM packages for interactivity in the terminal, like Blessed. And this is like a completely different angle on the widgets. I know in the past we have said the widgets are strictly web browser things and they will always be that. But it's still kind of fun just to see if we can push that architecture to work outside of the web browser and just kind of force ourselves to be a little more flexible. And lastly, I worked.
Are there any screenshots for what Blessed? I'm looking at their product. I'm looking at the product, but can you get us an idea of how this thing looks like?
I haven't played with it yet. I was just talking to Kyle about it today, so I actually don't know how it looks like beyond what they have uploaded there in that little animated GIF. But I'm hopeful. I mean, maybe it's got some cool things. I'm sure it won't be as useful as interactivity in the web browser, but I think it's worth exploring just to see what's actually there. And lastly, I worked with Carol, Anna, Cameron, and Brian to start the summer intern hiring at Cal Poly. So we too are looking to hire 3 or 4 interns. And that's it for me. Carol, I think you're next.
It looks like that she's listening in because she's sick.
Oh, Cal Poly sickness. Ouch.
Yeah, the Cal Poly sickness that's swarming the campus right now.
I actually have that a little bit too.
You do too? It brought it to LA.
Yeah.
All right. So for my work this past week, I've of course kept working with Chris and them. I haven't been able to as much this week as the previous weeks because of the Cal Poly hires and focusing on getting all that outputted as fast as can because people are getting snatched up with internships around here every day. So I made that marketing material. We're having a meet and greet session on Thursday where a bunch of designers and software engineers are going to come here, get a better feel of the project and get a better feel of what the positions would entail. So including with that, we made the job descriptions for both UX designer and software engineer interns, so 3 or 4 people. And over the next week or so, I'm going to start making some business cards for the project. If anybody else wanted those, ping me. So I'm going to make the overall design and you'd be able to edit it up. And lastly, I also started earlier this week making some marketing guidelines, some logo usage for the Jupyter logo. And I was thinking of making a web page along with that. That could be a second like documentation page for marketing guidelines. And I'm hoping we can get that out in the next few weeks. I already have it all written out. It's a matter of making it presentable and a web page. So that's my report for this week. And cool. Safia, I think your mic is off.
Hello? Okay. Sorry, guys. I thought I clicked the unmute button, but I hadn't. I don't have too much to report on today. I've been working on my Tennessee talk on Jupyter kernels and doing some Jupyter Day Chicago stuff. And that's been pretty much it. I think Peter is next.
Yeah. Safia, what's this musical solo? I'm really curious.
I will be singing about kernels in my High Tennessee talk. It'll be great.
Awesome.
That will be recorded.
I don't know if that was a statement or a question. I guess Geno and I are up next. I think Geno's on too. Not too much going on. We're working away diligently on getting the dashboards to work standalone in a standalone app. We're just calling the thing a dashboard server for now. I don't know what better thing to call it yet. Naming is hard. But this is the little app that's going to take a notebook and then using all the new goodness like Jupyter.js widgets and Jupyter.js services and so on, expose the layout that was put into the notebook back in the notebook server as a standalone dashboard. So it's pretty much where we were back in August, September with Feed, but now redone using all the new libraries. And so it's more secure, can be made more secure, right? The front end browser doesn't have indiscriminate access to send arbitrary code to a kernel. We can do login. The code isn't right in the HTML of the page, right? So it's a different use case than Feed, but we're pretty much to a point where we can get basic IPy widgets working. So I've had a lot of back and forth with Jonathan and Steven about this, and thanks a lot, guys. That helps, and we'll keep in touch about what's working and if we find anything. But so far, so good. It's coming along. And then the only other thing I think is, I plan to get back to looking at the UX survey results. Just I haven't had time to do it. I've got some thoughts on how to, roll that up into a nice summary. I just got to find the hours to put in to do that. Geno, if you're on, do you have anything you want to add?
I think it would be worth mentioning. Did you update about the blog post for Kernel Gateway?
Yeah, I put those on the list, and I think they circulated a little bit on Twitter. So we made a couple blog posts about microservices and Kernel Gateway, and Fernando corrected my inability to copy paste plain text apparently. So thank you, Fernando.
Yeah, so all I would say is I'll encourage folks to take a look. I've been playing with Kernel Gateway over the past week and a half, and we're basically having a lot of fun creating little REST-ful services using notebooks and Docker containers, and very, very fast prototyping tool, to say the least.
No, that's great, and thanks guys for writing those 3 blog posts. Actually, I think it's very useful to have that kind of communication around the technical core of the work you've done. So I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks. I think Jason's up next.
Can you hear me? Am I on?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Jason.
Just continued working on the Jupyter Lab notebook and some other bugs, like a bug in the notebook, the current notebook, with ignoring evaluations before a kernel starts up. I've been reading a lot about application state and Falcor and GraphDB and Next and a bunch of there's a ton of research going on right now about how to deal with application state in JavaScript frameworks. And also just a request for comment. I plan on integrating the cells, the input area and the output area, which right now are separate repos, into the Jupyter.js notebook repo. It'll be a lot more manageable, and as we're doing this code, it seems like it'll be harder to use these 3 different repos independently of the notebook, if the notebook is the one orchestrating a lot of the execution logic and the logic behind these components. So
do you mean just basically merging those repos into a larger repo and kind of somewhat freezing the individual repos? Is that what you're saying?
Essentially, yeah, merging the repos into a larger repo and still making them componentized in the larger repo, just as default implementations of each of those components. And then we have possibility of overwriting those in the future. But for right now, it seems like the separate repos is not very necessary.
I'm all for that. I actually think that our kind of supernova explosion of repos is one of the things that makes it harder for people to participate and contribute. Right. So if these 4 things really are meant to go together, at least for the foreseeable future, while doing early iteration, having to manage 4 balls up in the air is just an extra complication that's probably unnecessary. So I'm +1 on that idea. Thank you, and I thank you for it.
Yeah, even though this sets us back from my 100 repo goal.
I know.
I'm disappointed about that.
Look, I'm sure we will get there, Jason. So don't worry too much. We don't have to reach the end of the world today.
Hey, Jason.
Before we switch topics, sorry, just on the previous thing, should we schedule at the end of the meeting another meeting off of this one to follow up on your work on Falcor and GraphDB and these questions, since we already had a good productive one a few days ago?
Yeah, an application state. Yeah. Maybe at the end of this week. That'll give me a little more time to play with some ideas and play with some ideas for widgets as well, to get some comments. And I'd love to see some of the work that's been done with menus and palettes and stuff. I have a hesitation with pushing the user interface paradigms in radical ways without a lot of user testing. But I'd like to see what guys have been, what Darian and Chris have been doing.
It sounds scarier than it is. So it degenerates to basically what you would typically get in a menu situation, except flyout menus rather than being flyout and occupying a separate space on either side of the menu. It actually just refilters your current view to show the items that are relevant to that category. So it's less onerous than it sounds in words, and I'm happy to do another hangout later to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I'd love to see, and whoever, it'd be fun to have sort of a group hangout instead of just individual people talking and see some of these ideas.
Yeah, we've actually done quite a few group hangouts with Brian, but I don't think you were around at the time to join.
Yeah,
so.
Sure. Yeah, I realize it's been moving fast.
Yeah.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
With the taking the input and output areas and putting them into the same repo as the notebook, are you still going to leave them as separate packages?
Good question. I was going to rely on Steve's experience consolidating or putting modularizing a single repo. We could leave them as separate packages. I think I was just going to combine them into a single package Jupyter.js notebook, but make the files so that you could import specific components if you wanted to, and rely on your bundler to be smart about just including parts that you were actually using. Do you have comments on that?
No, I have a question, because I was thinking about doing the same kind of thing with the widget stuff. Like, we don't really have to split it into separate repos. We could just leave it all in that one repo. But I know NPM has like some really nice integration with Git, and I was just wondering like how that behaves, because you can do like npm version major, and it will bump you a major, but it'll also tag the repo, and that's really nice.
Right.
Like, can you disable that?
NPM has this assumption. NPM has this assumption that it seems like it crops up a lot of different places that a repo is a package, and you don't have multiple packages inside a single repo. I wasn't going to try to push that boundary.
Okay, yeah, because it's a nice assumption when it's actually the case, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'd like to explore that idea further, because we're feeling that same kind of pain. Like, our lives would be so much easier if we could just have the single phosphor repo and just let the bundler just expose some better imports and let your bundler deal with that. And yeah, it'd be a big dependency for people to pull down if they just want signaling or something. But like, it makes our lives so much more difficult and so much more onerous for maintaining the separate repos. So I don't know, maybe if we can have another hangout and decide really how we want to optimize, like whether we want to optimize for package install space or optimize for developer productivity. So yeah, happy to have that conversation too.
So I linked Babbel's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, man.
Just saying that you posted a useful link, so I think you can continue.
Yeah, so I posted a link to the monorepo thing from Babbel. They do have like all their packages are under packages, and then they have independent package.json, which means that you could bump versions altogether. And somehow they're handling it. It's the same way that React handles it as well now. So it's basically one big repo with lots of packages underneath, so people can just use the pieces they want.
Wait, where did you post the link? Is it in the hackathon somewhere? I can't hear you.
It's in Gitter/Jupyter notebook.
You have 5 different places chats can go.
Yeah, let's add it to the to the hackpad so it's a little bit more persistent in the notes. Hey Chris, if I can provide a vote in the comment you just made a few minutes ago, I would say right now we should try to encourage ease of development and ease of contribution. I think anything that helps lowering the complexity of our contribution and development process right now is something that we should do. And if the cost of that is hard drive space, so be it. I think for now, one of the biggest problems we have is that entering certain parts of the project has become fairly complex for new people. And so anything we can do to lower that barrier, I think, is a worthwhile effort.
Agreed.
Nick can't make it, so he left his note. So I guess I'm next. I've been mostly working on hiring-related matters. We also had an interesting discussion with Yui Panda, who many of you have seen, mostly on Gitter, though he posts to the list occasionally. He works at the Wikimedia Foundation, and he's doing a lot of work on Jupyter Hub. So he came and visited visited us at BIDS. We met with Matthias and Jess Hamrick, and he's doing a ton of work on Jupyter Hub for the Wikimedia Foundation that aligns well with us. I think he already, I don't know if he already put it as a PR, but he has it working already on his own. I don't know if, I think he has it as a small repo, the ability to deploy Jupyter Hub on Nginx instead. And he has some cycles available coming up sort of in the next few months to put work on this. So I suspect we're going to be doing quite a bit given the alignment of his interests with what we're doing with Jupyter Hub. So this is mostly going to be with Jess, but man, I wanted to let you know that he probably will be around quite a bit, and he's probably going to be spending some time at BIDS. And then the rest, some funding agency reporting that I had to deal with, which is kind of the fun part of my job, obviously. And we also had a good discussion with a campus postdoc who works on the circadian rhythm time series data and who might be interested in using MLTSP, which is a separate project independent of us that I work on with Jason Grout, with Josh Bloom, I'm sorry, another J, with Josh Bloom here, and Stefan van der Walt helps us. It's a platform for machine learning on time series data and feature engineering. And we found that we probably will be doing some integration with Jupyter Hub into that to solve some problems with the UI development in MLTSP. So that could be an interesting use case moving forward. And that's it for me. I think Damien said he's on vacation. So Anna, I think you have the last, not the last word, but the last slot.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. So just a few updates from me on operations. First, I can tentatively share that another Jupyter Day is being planned for March 17th and 18th at Harvard. Once I have final details of the proposed agenda, I can share that out with you guys. I know that the organizers, Andrew from O'Reilly and Chris Erdman, are looking for participation from the steering council as far as speakers go. So once I have a better idea of topics that they're looking to cover, I can share that with the group and figure out if we can help supply them with some speakers for the 2 days that they're planning. The first day they're planning is content-wise, they're looking for lecture-style presentations, and then the second day is going to be more hands-on coding, teaching, and that sort of thing. So look for an email from me, hopefully in the next couple of days, at the latest by the end of this week. Updates on the dev meeting. Fernando, do you want to go ahead and share location and dates? Do you feel like it's final enough, or?
I think it's at least close to final. So yeah, that's something that I forgot to put on my report. We've been working on dev meeting planning, and I think we're probably converging on the week of March 28th to happen in the Bay Area this time around. And hopefully what we can do is kind of alternate to spread the travel misery around between the coasts. Do the fall one maybe on the East Coast if possible, and the spring one in the West Coast. And I think I have sorted out the logistics for meeting rooms between LBL and campus. So the tentative plan, the tentative plan would be to meet the first 3 days up at LBL, where I have a couple of large conference rooms and work areas available, and then the last 2 days down in Evans 481, where we could not all fit in one room. But what I expect is that by now the meeting is large enough that it doesn't make sense for all of us to be in the same room all the time. And so we can probably spread out between the 3 rooms that Evans 481 has. Jason, since you were there for Sage meeting, the Sage Days meeting that used those 3 rooms in that format. I wanted your input. Do you think that's a reasonable thing to do?
How many people were you talking about again? It seemed to work well with Sage Days.
We're probably going to have up around 18, max 20. And so I was thinking that once we're broken up into 3 groups, spreading 18 people between those 3 rooms is reasonable. Having them all in one room all day is not reasonable in the main room, but having them spread out with some people in the office, since it won't be a video studio, so 3 to 4 people can work in that office, probably 6 or 7 can work in the conference room, and that means it's like 8 people working in the main room or so, 8 or 9, and that seems like a reasonable breakdown to me. We obviously can overflow into bids if need be, because bids is just a 3-minute walk away in the library.
Yeah, that seems reasonable based on our experience. The one thing we saw was that the conference room echoes a ton, and so it was impossible to have 2 separate groups in the conference room working together, working on separate things, but in the same room.
Okay, so the conference room would basically be either one group or people working quietly on their own stuff, but not 2 active conversations.
I think so. I think that's what we found.
Okay. And then we would come back on Friday afternoon I have a big conference room for Friday afternoon. After lunch, we can head back up to LBL, where I have a 20-person conference room booked if we want to do a final debrief and kind of wrap up in plans at the end of the day on Friday. So yeah, Anna, I think that's it. And these plans are not 100% set in stone, but I think we're converging. And I'll confirm in the next few days once I have cost estimates for the lodging. But we can use the faculty clubs and the LBL guest house to actually probably make it a little bit less expensive.
Okay, great. So back and forth conversation on email regarding 2 topics, LinkedIn and also the geek, sorry, not the geek. I was looking at geek feminism in my notes. The LinkedIn page and whether we should create one, and then the code of conduct for events, which we plan on using for Safia's Jupyter Day and for all events moving forward. So I think on the LinkedIn, we've landed on a place that means that I'll set up a page for Project Jupyter, and that we'll use it kind of as a placeholder for the namesake and to push people to our other pages. And that's kind of where we'll leave that, a basic presence that kind of promotes our online presence in other locations. For the code of conduct, I owe you guys the online community code of conduct, which I think has to be different than the events policy. But the enforcement section is going to be very similar for both. So we're just going to set up kind of a reporting structure that involves a couple different options for people as to whether they want to remain anonymous or they want to report something directly. And I'll be seeking comment from everyone and feedback from the community once that's in draft form. I didn't really see any comments on the events one other than some
I do intend.
Or
I'm sorry. I actually do intend to jump on that. I just haven't had the time. I've been completely swamped. But I certainly do intend to hop on.
Yeah, and I pulled that. Primarily, 90% of that was from the Geek Feminism Wiki. Looks like Carol put a comment on there that's what is being used at Python, PyCon, or that's what several different conferences out there are basing their code of conduct on that. So I kind of matched that to one that Katie White had started and combined the 2 together. So
yeah, I would suggest, in as much as possible, we should probably start off the Python/PyCon ones in the sense that we are most closely aligned with that community, and I think they've done a good job. And most of the people in our in our space have participated in events like PyCon. They've already in the mailing list of that community, etc. So working off the Python ones is probably from a cultural. I mean, these documents are also meant to create and maintain and direct the culture of the community, and ours is in many ways sort of a subset of the larger Python one. So I would suggest using the Python ones as the starting point, and they've been widely used already in really large communities and events, much larger than we are. So I think they're a very reasonable starting point.
Okay. That is all I have. I think Cameron mentioned we've all kind of been working on the recruiting efforts for the summer interns at Cal Poly, and we're having an open house on Thursday. So pulling that together pretty quickly. We'll see what kind of response we get, but that's pretty much it for me.
Great. Thank you, Anna. Does anyone else have anything that they want to pop in at the end?
I'll throw in that one of my co-workers in Southampton wrote a TCL kernel to learn about the kernel machinery.
Nice. Is it up on the little? I mean, is it actually installable, or is it just a personal toy project for now?
It's installable-ish with a bit of fiddling. It's on GitHub, but I don't think it's linked from the wiki yet. Okay.
I'm hoping that someone out. I mean, we don't have the cycles for it right now, but I would love to see that basically that table turned into effectively hooked up to a CI system that runs your test, that test repo that you pointed out. I actually had forgotten about that repo in an automated way, and effectively at least maybe flag some of the tests as individual features that are reported, that are validated, and effectively have that matrix be a feature matrix of compliance of any given kernel with a list of key features. I mean, there may be more tests that are simply for internal sanity, but to have some of them be flagged as features, and then have them automatically reported, because it would be very nice if people could go and effectively see a matrix that has, I don't know, kernels on the rows, key features on the columns, and then the first column be a link to this is how you install it, with as consistent as possible installation mechanisms for all of them.
I'll just mention that the.
Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
Just mentioned that the kernel test repository, it works for any kernel in principle, but it needs customizing. So you have to like subclass the test case and fill in like bits of code that are relevant for that kernel so that it can test them.
The other thing I was going to say is I'm actually using that Jupyter test harness for things like Octave kernel, but unless you have your CI explicitly set up to install Octave Stable, you're not going to be able to do that automated from the central point. But that particular one is tested on CI now.
Okay, good. I know there's a fair amount of work to get something like that fully automated, but I don't think it's technically impossible. I mean, the code may not be set up exactly out of the box to do that, but I don't think it's technically impossible, and I think it would be a very healthy thing for us as a project, because right now we sort of claim we have, I don't know, 55 kernels or whatever long that list is now. But that's not really true. That's a little bit of an overstatement in the sense that many of those are at best kind of weekend toy exercises, and you couldn't really do anything practical with them. So I think it would be great if there was we could say, okay, this is what is there, and there may be 50 odd in that list, but these 10 you can see are actually tested, robust, reasonably feature complete, etc. But I do realize that it's not like the machinery is ready for that immediately. Okay. Is there anything else? I'm going to stop the recording, and then we can maybe plan for a second the meeting we discussed. So recording is stopping.